This video is going to be my first and obviously only preview of the Lions' trip to Houston to take on the Texans. This is a huge opportunity for a Detroit team that's on a roll recently, offensively in particular, but to make a statement, a clear statement, that they're one of the best football teams in the league. This preview is obviously at least a day late from my perspective in terms of producing content. We already know, or at least I think I do, that the Lions at 7-1 are one of the best teams in the NFL. But this is an opportunity for a third road win against a playoff caliber team through 9 games. I think that could really be considered a separator for this Detroit Lions football team. It would be a really badass achievement if you can get through 9 games and already have road wins over a 6-2 Vikings team, 6-3 Packers, and then the AFC South leading Texans. They'll be without Will Anderson and possibly or probably Nico Collins at this point. I think it probably makes sense for them to not play him. But if you look at their passing game results and the efficiency of C.J. Stroud with and without Nico Collins, they may choose to well, he's already activated. They may choose to keep him active and play him on Sunday night, even though long-term health-wise with a hamstring injury, perhaps it's best to let him sit out for another week. They'll also be without Will Anderson, and I think that's a huge loss. 7.5 sacks, leading the team. Without him and Collins, that would be 2 premier talents that would kind of skew this game, in my opinion. Is it a Super Bowl preview? I mean, the Texans have got some work to do. So do the Lions, clearly. Long time between now and that Super Bowl possibility. But I think Collins is the bigger loss, even though Anderson has 7.5 sacks and is a huge factor. Really athletic, super quick. Collins was off to an insane start before his injury against the Bills in Week 5. He was 32 of 45 catches. That's a 71% catch percentage, 3 touchdowns. But the big one is he was averaging 113 yards receiving per game. C.J. Stroud's stats are just drastically different when he plays and when he does not. He's a 6'4" wide receiver. He played college ball at Michigan. I'm sure most of you guys are Lions fans are already aware of that. When he does not play, the stats are drastically different. He'll be a huge boost for a team that has lost 2 of 3 at this point. Look, in their last 3 games, Houston has only totaled 457 passing yards. If you were to extrapolate that back 1 week further, essentially, since the week following his injury against the Bills in Week 5, they've averaged 158 passing yards per game since he went down. And those games are against the Patriots, Packers, Colts, and Jets in order. They are 22nd, 13th, 26th, and 2nd in passing yards allowed per game, those 4 teams. So it's not, other than the Jets, they're 2nd in the NFL. Other than that, it's not like all 4, the other 3 teams are elite at shutting down the pass. It's a real concern, and it's a real decision for Houston. Of course, by the time this video comes out and you guys watch it, perhaps that's already been announced. As I recorded early Sunday morning, really early, it has not. The Lions, by the way, are 26th in giving up 250 passing yards per game. 29th, excuse me. Most of that, however, was to Matt Stafford in Week 1, who played incredible. Geno Smith also threw for 383 in Week 3. There's also been 2 kind of, quote, garbage time fourth quarters the last 2 weeks against the Titans and then the Packers, whereby Aaron Glenn and those guys were kind of ceding ground, allowing passes to be completed to keep the clock running. Can the Texans get things done in the pass game if Collins doesn't play? That depends on their offensive line, but that matchup there is also very unique because Detroit's not getting to the quarterback. Zadarius Smith, I think, is officially questionable at this point. Whether he plays or not, I kind of have the same perspective on him as I do on Nico Collins. If he's not 100%, I feel like why put him out there in a game where you're already 7-2 with road wins over the Vikings and the Packers, 2 divisional opponents, but I understand there'll be different perspectives on that. I think Nico Collins is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Other than Justin Jefferson, I think he's the best wide receiver that Detroit's defense would have faced. Now, on the other side, in terms of Houston's defense, they are 4th in passing yards allowed per game, only 167 per. Also pretty good against the run. They did allow 163 on the ground to the Colts, I think 3 weeks ago at this point maybe. But Anthony Richardson was a big factor there. He had 45 yards rushing on the ground. Josh Allen also had 54 against them. Jared Goff's not going to be able to provide that. So whatever's produced in the run game from a Detroit perspective is going to have to be by the running backs. Most of this video is going to be commentary. My apologies. I probably should have let you guys know that at this point. But I will have a little bit of film displayed while I talk about some of Detroit's offense. It's a collision course, if you ask me, between an incredibly efficient Lions offense that's running into a really good defense. I think the Texans are one of the best defenses in the league, one of the best defenses across the NFL, in fact. Because they're so good against both the run and the pass. And I think that's the differential here between the teams that Detroit has faced recently and who they're going to face in this matchup. The Texans are good to very good against both the run and the pass. Exceptional getting after the quarterback. I think they have 29 sacks coming into this game. One of the factors here that I think is probably missed by many people, perhaps even myself in mentioning stats first, is that Detroit's offense has actually been better than the stats show since week 2. Goff, and this has been covered by many people, I'm sure, Goff is 106 of 128 passing. I think that's 81.8% passing since week 3. Detroit is 6-0 in that time frame, averaging 36 points per game. Goff during that stretch is at 10.3 yards per attempt, which is ridiculous. That would be number 1 in the NFL for the entire season, but again, it's only since week 3. He's second in the league in quarterback rating behind Lamar Jackson. I think his quarterback rating is 115. Lamar Jackson's is 123. He's also second in yards per attempt at 8.7. I think Lamar is number 1 at 9.3. Goff has been incredibly efficient and also really quick making his decisions. I think he knows the coverages generally. Now, some of the teams they've played recently, the Vikings, the Cowboys, who they played in last year's regular season, and the Packers, he had a lot of familiarity with those teams. Also the Rams. That dynamic does not exist with the Texans. So how adept, how quickly is he going to be able to decipher coverages and figure out what it is pre-snap or immediately after the snap? I don't know the answer to that question. I will say this. Last week against the Packers, I think there's some factors that are actually kind of pulling down some of the data, some of the impressive offensive data. So let me make sure I'm clear about that. Against the Titans, Detroit's offense got a short field multiple times. I think they scored 7 touchdowns, but had to short field on 4 or 5 of them. Last week against the Packers, 3 of the possessions in the second half was really Detroit just running the football to keep the clock moving, get their defense back on the field. That was after they went up 24-3 early in the third quarter. There was also kneel downs at the end of the game that I think kind of skew the data. In my opinion, Detroit's offense, as good as it looks statistically in the last 6 weeks, they've actually been a little bit better because the last 2 weeks against the Titans at home and then the Packers on the road, they didn't need to do much for pretty much 5 of those quarters of play, or perhaps if you just want to include the second halves, 4 of those quarters of play. The offense was essentially taken off. Goff only had 85 yards passing against the Titans. He did have 145 against the Packers. But they held big leads in the second half of both of those games. I think this is going to be a fun chess match to watch between Ben Johnson and D'Amico Ryans, who calls the defense for the Texans and has a wealth of experience against all kinds of different offenses. To my knowledge, these two have never met before. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section. I think St. Brown's 30-catch streak in a row may come to an end this week. And it's not because I think the Texans are going to shut him down or slow him down significantly. I think St. Brown's one of the best 10 football players in the entire league. You guys have heard me say that many times. But the Texans provide resistance against everything. They play a good brand of defense. They're very aware situationally. Watching them in the AFC division round last year against the Ravens, they come in prepared. If you've shown something on film, anything that's predictable, they're going to line up to it and put their players in position to stop it, or at least slow it down. Another factor here that I didn't mention is with Taylor Decker out, I think that means the pass pro becomes more complicated for Detroit. And in my opinion, pushes the run game to the forefront. The run game for Detroit and both teams, to be honest with you, but specifically for the Lions, becomes the real crux of the matter, in my opinion, in terms of deciding who gets control of the game early and who ultimately gets a win. Montgomery and Gibbs have been amazing this year. I think they've combined for over 1,000 yards rushing already. So far in 2024, Jonathan Taylor, the two running backs I have that have had the most success against him, Jonathan Taylor, 20 carries for 105 yards. And then James Cook, 20 carries for 82 yards. However, a duo or a pairing of running backs for the Jags combined for 140 in week 4. Now, the Texans did come back to win that game. I think it was in the last 16 or 25 seconds of the game to win it. Again, feel free to correct me in the comment section. I primarily focused my film study here on the Houston Texans games against the Colts and the Jets, with a little bit of film thrown in their loss to the Packers 24-22. But look, Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne produced 140 yards combined against this Texans defense. I kind of think that's the number. Meaning, I think that's the number that Detroit's got to get to. I don't mean that their coaching staff is looking at it that way. And I don't pay any attention to over-under for final score or total points or certain statistics at all. But for me, the number that makes sense is 140. Let's break that down a little bit, and let me explain it why. Against the better defenses that they have faced so far this year, that's been the number or the metric that Detroit's got to get to in order to win the game. 144 rushing yards in their 31-29 win over the Vikings. 139 yards in their Week 2 home loss to the Bucs. Still a very close game, obviously. And then again, Week 1 against the Rams, with some of the film that's showing here, 163 rushing yards. But 60 of that, or 58 of that, I believe, came in overtime on the game-winning drive that you're seeing some film of here. I don't think 140 yards is what's needed to win. That's not the way that I'm trying to present this. I think it's needed for these reasons: to control the ball, control the flow of the game, set up the play-action pass, win the field position battle. These all sound very cliche. I understand that. But with Taylor Decker being out, and look, he had been struggling recently, in my opinion, in pass pro, I think for at least the last 2 weeks, if not 3, going back to the Vikings game. That allows Goff to be under control, safeguarded, if you will, given time to throw the ball, make quick decisions. But another thing that I believe about, I'm starting to formulate a more concrete thought, and feel free to let me know if others have explained this better than I do. I think Goff gets directional calls and run-pass calls. Now, I'm not talking about RPOs. I'm talking about plays that are called for him such that it's a run concept, and then he gets to pick the side. And I believe a lot of that, from a Goff and Lions perspective, is based on zone versus man. Essentially, if he gets zone, he's going to make a left call, let's say Louis, and then motion someone over right to left to get an extra guy there to block. This is a very simplistic explanation of my thoughts, so forgive me for throwing it in during this preview, which again is at least 24 hours too late. If he gets man, make a Louis call and motion someone left to right to get that defender out of there. You're also removing a potential blocker. Understand? So again, there's a simplistic or surface level evaluation being done here. But my point is, if the run game is successful, if the run game is something that can get going, and Goff can be in control of those directional calls, if you believe what I'm saying, and the run-pass calls, basically where there's a run-pass play called and Goff has the option to choose which one to utilize in a given situation, in order for all of that to flow, in my opinion, the run game's got to be working. What yards per carry? I'm not sure. I mean, the Texans are at 4.8. There's some data out there that they're really, really good against the run, but you watch some of the film, and you're like, I see some big runs occurring as well. They almost seem to be, against the run, that is, a little bit of a splash defense. Like they'll make tackles for loss or tackles right at the line of scrimmage, but they also give up a number of 8 or 10 yard gains. So I don't know how that dynamic plays out. I think there's a lot of key matchups here. A guy that I really like for their team, and I have for a long time, is Jalen Petre. He's a safety that they've kind of moved to nickel primarily this year. They're a base nickel defense generally, so that'll be, and that's a factor that it becomes really important for the Lions with Decker being out. If Skipper ends up playing left tackle, that removes him from being the tight end. And if the Texans are going to base out of a nickel and you were to go jumbo 12 or even jumbo 13, I think that puts them, the Texans, at a tremendous disadvantage. Well, that opportunity is removed with Decker being out and Skipper being inserted as a starting offensive lineman, presumably. So Danielle Hunter becomes a big swing matchup here with Will Anderson out. It's not that other guys can't get to the quarterback. I actually really like the career that Jerry Hughes has put out there. Danico Autry was a really under-the-radar signing for this team. Many franchises, I think, were in on him, including the Lions, in my opinion. So Danielle Hunter, being able to hold him down at all, whether he lines up to the left or to the right, depending on if Sewell plays left tackle or right tackle, I don't know, and I don't read any of those things. I think on the other side of the ball, Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph versus C.J. Stroud, turnovers are going to be a key. The Texans have forced 10 turnovers defensively in their last 4 games, but they're only 2-2 during that stretch. They are +4 on the year from a turnover standpoint, but they're at that point because of forcing 10 turnovers in the last 4 games. Detroit, on the other side, is +11 turnovers. They're tied for the league lead in that margin with the Buffalo Bills. They've got 11 interceptions, 6 of them by Kirby Joseph, 4 of them by Brian Branch. Stroud has only thrown 4 interceptions on the year, and Joe Mixon is a huge part of their offense behind an offensive line that, I'll be honest with you, I think looks like an average offensive line for the teams that are going to be in the playoffs. I'm not saying that they have an average offensive line across the entirety of the NFL, but for the teams that are going to be in the playoffs, I think the Texans' offensive line should be better than it is. And I think the Texans franchise and their front office and their fan base want it to be better than it is, but it's just not right now. And I mean that against the pass or against the run. These two guys, Branch and Kirby Joseph, back there trying to get after the ball. It's a shame that Aiden Hutchinson isn't able to play, along with, obviously, Marcus Davenport. These guys can make plays. The man-to-man defensive structure that they often rely on, going to be a big swing factor again if and when Nico Collins gets into the football game. I guess another option for Collins would be to play him on certain downs, limit his exposure, if you will, such that the chances of injuring his hamstring or re-injuring it, I should say, are lessened. I think we got to find out whether they're going to be able to run the ball well against this Detroit defense that really, to be honest with you, hasn't been as good in the last 2 or 3 weeks stopping the run since Aiden Hutchinson went out, essentially. So you have injury factors on both sides. I think it's very cliche, some of the keys to the game that I mentioned earlier. It's the same thing I pretty much mention all the time. Turnovers, running the football to generate yards that are low risk, particularly for the Lions, because of Taylor Decker being out. I don't think you want to get in situations where you're in a whole lot of 3rd and 8s against this defense. They're very good against the pass, in my opinion, well coached by D'Amico Ryans. I think they are smart in the way that they line up, essentially where their feet are planted pre-snap, and they're also very intelligent about the coverages they play depending on what formation you line up in. Detroit, I think, wants to control their run game. Joe Mixon, who's having a career year at this point. If you can't stop it, at least slow it down significantly enough such that you put Stroud in those known passing situations. He's going to make quick decisions. He's got a quick release, very accurate quarterback. Detroit has to, I think, protect Goff and simultaneously on the other side try to get some pressure on C.J. Stroud, move him off his spot. Just don't let him sit back there and pick you apart. They will play a lot of man-to-man defense, they being the Lions. I think the Texans' O-line is a question mark here, along with Detroit's pass rush, that is, both of them. It seems like those are the weaker sides to the whole dynamic with this matchup. Texans' offensive line and pass pro and run blocking, and then Detroit's pass rush. Houston has allowed 31 sacks so far this year, which really kind of makes Stroud's production, even when Nico Collins was there, even more remarkable. Essentially, they're allowing over 3 sacks per game. On the other side, Detroit's only given up 19 through 8 games, but 9 of those have occurred in the last 3 contests. I don't do predictions. I don't feel like I'm capable or competent in doing so. Feel free to let me know if you think that's a cop-out. I think this one could vary wildly, depending on turnovers, number 1. Number 2, if Nico Collins is able to play. And number 3, 3A, I should say, is are these teams able to run the football well against each other? There is something that tells me Houston's going to be able to run the ball against Detroit out of 11 personnel. They utilize a lot of 11 personnel to run the ball. And in fact, the last 2 games film that I saw, that's where I saw them doing most of their damage was out of 11 personnel. Very different looking offense than the one that I saw in 2023. And I think for their benefit, for C.J. Stroud's benefit as well statistically, but also in terms of winning the football game, Houston would rely on the run game to set up the play action pass. Sounds very similar to what I described with Jared Goff. Almost sounds like we're talking about a football game from 20 years ago. And in fact, I think these two teams do play kind of a throwback style. It'll make it a whole lot of fun to watch. I'm kind of glad that it's a night game and not a 1 p.m. football game, so we can really focus on it. If you guys enjoyed the preview, please let me know in the comment section. I know it was all pretty much commentary with very little film study. The plays I showed are designed to line up with what I was talking about at the time. Increasingly, the NFL kind of is coming down on usage of NFL film, so I'm not sure what that dynamic is or how long it's going to persist. So there are opportunities to put out content that don't include film, and I understand it makes it probably less attractive for people. So feel free to let me know what you think of that in the comments section. If you think other Lions fans would enjoy this preview of their Week 10 visit to Houston, a third opportunity at a road win over a quality team. If you think other Lions fans would enjoy my thoughts and perhaps some of the stats or interesting angles that I brought to this video, then please consider grabbing a link to this video, sharing it out on social media to help this content get more reach.